Should we give the others another minute or so?
You're live.
We're live. We'll go ahead and go with that. Good evening. And it's kind of humorous in a way to say welcome to the class tonight, because I'm not looking at everybody who's present. One of the main ones has just shown up, so as long as Jim's here, we're good to go. That'll take you. I've got a story tonight, brother, that you will appreciate. And if you can dig back into your memory banks there, it's a story about Lynn Anderson. All right, we're going to study in the book of Mark tonight. We're going to start in chapter 6, and we're going to talk about some amazing stories that are found here in this particular text. You know, there are some things that truly amaze me when I stop and think about it, and probably you do too. You make a list, it'd be interesting to see what we all would write down. But before we do that, why don't we start with a word of prayer? Let's do that. Father, I ask you to bless us this evening as we study from your word. May we glean truth from there, Father, so that we are understanding properly what's been recorded for us. And may we, Father, after we glean that truth, then take it and apply it to our lives personally. And as we see the benefit in applying that to our lives, may we then, Father, have enough love and courage to share it with others who need it. There are so many of them. Father, bless our study this evening. May we honor the name of Jesus. And may we be guided by the Holy Spirit. And we ask for your help and guidance. In Jesus' precious name. Amen. So, you know, things that amaze us, I could look around creation. There are people that I have met who have been amazing people to get to know. For me, I think the most amazing thing would be what I find in the Bible, in the scriptures, and looking at that. Other people, though, have things that amaze them, and I think that in turn amazes me. What amazes them? One fellow did an informal poll of some friends of his, and he asked them what amazed them. And here's some of the responses that they gave, just a little sampling. One of them said, the life cycle from fertilization of a microscopic egg to a living, breathing, eating human being. That amazed them. Someone else said, how resilient children are. And someone else said, how the eyeball works. And boy, that really is an amazing thing if you've ever done any study on that. Someone said how much money it takes to get through life. Someone says how hard the enemy will work to distract you, discourage you, and damage you. And then how much harder the Lord works to restore you, love you, and call you back to his presence when you feel like it's hopeless. That is truly amazing. It had to have been a mother who said, how many times a kid can say, Mom, before I can answer? That is kind of amazing. And someone else said how people can look at the same situation with completely different opinions. I think that's about as relevant today as anything I've heard of lately. Truly amazing things. I doubt there's anything more amazing than the story of Jesus Christ when you look in the scriptures. I think he's the most amazing character to ever grace the pages of human history, let alone the Bible. And somebody said even if you don't believe in him, that as a historian you'd have to concede that no one single life has so impacted the world as that one amazing life. And I think that's right. I don't think anyone else has ever impacted all of history as much as the life of Jesus Christ. And that's just absolutely incredible. Matter of fact, one of my favorite songs says, I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned unclean. For me it was in the garden, he prayed, not my will but thine. He had no tears for his own griefs, but sweat drops of blood for mine. He took my sins and my sorrows, he made them his very own. He bore the burden to Calvary and suffered and died alone. When with the ransomed in glory his face I at last shall see, 'twill be my joy through the ages to sing of his love for me. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. That is amazing to stop and think about what he did, not just for mankind, but to make it personal, what he did for me, what he did for you. Truly and absolutely amazing individuals. And coupled with that are some of the most amazing stories about individuals that you will read about in the scriptures who come in contact with Jesus. And what we're going to look at tonight is how amazing they are on a positive side and how amazing they can be on a negative side. And so we're going to stop and look at that. We've looked at, for the last few weeks, at some amazing stories just in there. You know, Jesus stopping a storm on the Sea of Galilee in the middle of the night with seasoned sailors who were with him but yet terrified. And then he takes a man who is possessed by a legion of demons and casts them out from him. How he heals a woman who had been sick for 12 years and then raises up a little 12-year-old girl from death. That's amazing. He's an amazing character, and those people, I'm sure, they had some stories just absolutely incredible and phenomenal. So we're going to look a little bit and watch and see some more amazement. This text is what somebody called an unmiracled story. The uniqueness is not how people were amazed by Jesus, but how Jesus was amazed by people. That's an interesting thing to ponder. Look at Mark chapter 6, beginning verse 1 with me. He left there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. Where did this man get these things, they said? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? And how are these miracles performed by his hands? You got to watch the wording now. Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And aren't his sisters here with us? So they were offended by him. Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his household. He was not able to do a miracle there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. He was going around the villages and teaching. I want you first of all to consider that here in this text we have an amazing story of unbelief. When you look at the background that's here, the bright good news of Jesus is always set against a dark background, it seems like. Somebody said that, you know, when you go to a jeweler and they want to show you a diamond, how beautiful it is, they set it against a black piece of cloth so that you can see the brightness of it and appreciate it more. And that's kind of what happens with Jesus. And one of the interesting things to stop and think about is, here he comes back to his hometown of Nazareth. He has left where he's been at, comes to his hometown. He's accompanied by his disciples. It says specifically he came back with his disciples. He'd been there once before in Luke chapter 4, and now he's come back again for the second time. John chapter 1 and verse 11 says, he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. They did not. You would think that family and friends would do that. When you go back to Luke chapter 4 and you notice the first time he came to Nazareth, he had a very rough experience. He hadn't done any miracles yet, and there was nothing there that would cause a lot of attention to be sent his way. He was really just beginning at that time. And he went to the synagogue, the Bible says, as his custom was, where he had grown up, and he was being received as the learned visitor to the synagogue, and he was asked to be the speaker. And they gave him a scroll to read, and he read from Isaiah the prophet. And what was interesting about that was, after he finished reading from that, he was standing up, and then he sat down as the custom was, and he said, today, this prophecy has been fulfilled in your hearing. It's been fulfilled in the person of me. I'm the one Isaiah was talking about. And the people were pretty offended at that. And the story ends with the people trying to take him out and murder him. They wanted to take him over to a cliff and throw him off the edge. And they were unable to do that. He disappeared. You know, speaking as a preacher, I don't know about you, Jim, but I've been to a few places where I think some of them wanted to do me in, but not quite that badly. You know, they wanted some bad things for me. But I've had some reason why I didn't want to return back to some of those places either. You know, that was never a problem. Like I said, you know, nobody tried to murder me. There may be one or two who gave it some thought. I'm not too sure about that. But Jesus didn't go back to Nazareth right away. It's his hometown to boot, and he went off and he had some other things that he was doing. And then he's going to come back to his hometown. Luke says in Luke 4 that he had gone in the power of the Spirit right after his temptation, apparently. He might have even done some carpentry work in that town growing up. He might have even worked on some things for some of those people there, you know. They were offended at him, though. Here in Mark 6, he returns. And he comes back now. He's the most famous citizen that the town of Nazareth has ever known. It wasn't a real well-known town anyway. Matter of fact, it didn't have that good of a reputation. In John 1, a man will ask, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Speaking about Jesus. You know, so it had that kind of a reputation. And now they have the most famous person in the country calling Nazareth his hometown. I remember when we lived in Arkansas and Bill Clinton became president. Boy, everybody wanted to claim a hometown then. There were 2 or 3 places, I think, that were kind of talking about that. Anyway, this time he's come back. And he's already done some miracles that kind of wowed people in other places and across the nation. And he's the one speaker that people have gone miles out of their way to hear. And he's the most famous person to ever grow up in that town. Somebody said it was an act of grace that he even wanted to come back at all to Nazareth. Look at verse 1. Came to his own hometown, and he brought his disciples with him. And Mark gives us some very specific phrases that he uses in his gospel. See, he didn't do that the first appearing in Luke chapter 4. But he does it here in Mark 6. Now, that was important among the Jews because somebody who came back with disciples was recognized as a rabbi. And he's claiming that. Only rabbis walked around with disciples. And he's coming back and presenting himself to his hometown as a rabbi. I guess the parallel, and I'm nowhere close to even wanting a comparison like that, how interesting it's been for me to come back to my hometown where I grew up at and preach for 12 years. Well, more than that now, about 17, and working with churches. So it's kind of interesting to think about what he's doing. But verse 3 says, they were offended by him. The word offense there is a very strong word. It literally means they stumbled. We get our English word as a transliteration from the Greek, scandal. And that's what the Greek word meant in its root. And they were scandalized by Jesus. He came back as a rabbi. Well, why would they be so offended and scandalized? Part of it was because of what they said about him. They're questioning his credentials. Where did this man get this wisdom? Where did he get these, how does he do these miracles? I mean, after all, isn't this just the carpenter's son? See, there weren't any religious schools there in Nazareth. There was no place for formal education, at least, and especially on a graduate level, like we might talk about it, more than just Bible school. Now, they admitted he's got some incredible wisdom, and they admitted, man, he really has done some fantastic miracles. He's got some power. But where did he get these things from? What's this wisdom and these miracles? This is what they know. He didn't get it in Nazareth. He didn't get it in Nazareth. He must have gotten it somewhere else. What's interesting is they're asking the right questions, but with the wrong attitude. They couldn't deny his wisdom, and they couldn't deny his works. But they had some prejudices. And those prejudices ruled out attributing either his wisdom or his works to a divine source. They just couldn't bring themselves to do that. And so in verse 4, Jesus makes a statement about a prophet being without honor, except in his hometown and among his relatives and his household. They knew his brothers and sisters. They knew his family tie. They were right there with those people with them, and there was nothing special about them. There was nothing special about the people in Nazareth. I mean, we're just good old boys. So what's the big deal about him? Why should we think he's anything and anybody special? Somebody said it actually suggests something about their own self-esteem. And I thought about that when I thought, I think that's probably right. He can't be anything special because we're not anything special and he's just one of us. Wow. It really bothered them to stop and think, that there's no accepted school where he could have gone to around here. And there was no accepted school in Jerusalem where he went. How dare he come back here and try to pawn himself off, pass himself on to us as being a rabbi? He's just a carpenter. That's all he is. Somebody could have said, if we put it our modern verbiage, that, I used to teach that boy in Sunday school. Or maybe, I used to get my plow fixed over at his shop. Maybe he's fooled all those other villages, but he's not fooling us. He grew up here. We know him. We know his background, and we know his credentials. Yeah, it's amazing how people can think sometimes when they have a prejudice working. But here's the one that really is the kicker. Isn't this Mary's son? Anybody have an idea why that's pretty significant? Good. I get to share it then, from what I've found. When he was in Nazareth earlier, in Luke 4:22, they said, this is Joseph's son. Now they're offended at him. He's a scandal to them, and they call him Mary's son. Well, it's because Joseph had probably died by then. But in Semitic culture, even if your father was dead, you didn't call a man by his mother's name unless you were slurring. And that's what they're doing. They're insinuating something about the illegitimacy of his birth. You know, you were born out of wedlock. What do you think about that? You know, there were questions that had been going around for several years about his birth. Don't kid us, you know. You don't even have a true father. And you're calling yourself a teacher. Here's the ironic thing. They thought they knew so much about him, and they really knew nothing about him at all. They really weren't paying attention because they were making all their determinations based upon their history, their theology, their culture, their customs, you know, and their traditions, just, you know, the way they thought. They couldn't think outside the box. They had this little bitty box that was closed in where they couldn't see beyond, and it was myopic. They couldn't see more than just right there in front of them. And that's the way they were viewing things. I actually think it says something more about the humanness of Jesus that we really don't think about a lot. You know, have you ever asked yourself what kind of mental images you have of Jesus? I've seen some of the other images that people have done over the centuries. They put them in art form and so forth. You know, the way they have pictured him. And I think it's interesting to see that he was so much of a man. And those who knew him best, because they saw him that way as only a human, they had trouble believing in him. Somebody said sometimes when we get through with Jesus, he walks around with a halo and about 3 inches off the ground. One of my instructors in preaching school years ago taught us, and I've never forgotten it. I've always appreciated it. He said, you know, you got to stop and think Jesus was a man who perspired. He had body odor. His feet got dirty and they smelled, you know, and when you stop and think about that, that's kind of like, I don't know if we can picture Jesus that way. Yeah, you can as a man. Just don't get the wrong picture of a man, you know, and limit him too much and all that. We're going to see how they did that. But he's a man who laughed, who cried, he drank from their wells, he washed in their rivers, he ate after a hard day's work just like they did. Now, what does that do for your image of Jesus? It may change it a little bit to look at that. It was such a problem for them, and I think even today, sometimes it's a problem for us more because we don't want to think about that humanness of Jesus. We go too far to the deity side. They went too far to the human side. And there's a blending where you've got 100% man, 100% God. I had remember the church where I preached years ago, the first preaching place I had, he said, you can't have 200% of anything. You can have 50% or 50%, but you can't get 200%. I said, unless you're God and you're dealing with something about faith that we got to go with. 100% man, 100% God. Hebrews 4 and verse 15 says, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. He's as human as we are. And so we can approach the throne of grace with confidence, the writer said, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You know, as incredible as the deity of Jesus is, I am so thankful for the humanness of Jesus. And you know, we gotta reconsider what's there. Their problem was they said he didn't have the right credentials. But Mark tells us what the real problem is. Their lack of faith. That's the real problem. As a matter of fact, look at those words. It says, Jesus, in verse 6, was amazed at their unbelief. Have you ever thought about that? You know, Jesus was never amazed at other things he did, like his miracles, or the things that he taught. He was never amazed at himself. But he was amazed at people. And that's interesting when you think about the deity and the humanity of Jesus coming together. And again, that image of how does somebody who's the Son of God, amazed at anything. How do you catch him off guard? We're giving some insight to his humanity. He's amazed at the conclusions that their thinking would lead them to. The basis of their unbelief was trusting in human wisdom and just human abilities. They left God out of the picture. And that's why when we stop and think about some of what's going on in the world today, as crazy as it is, and I've had people ask me, why is it like that? Why are people like that? When you leave God out of the picture, you come up with some off-the-wall conclusions that just amaze you. And to think about Jesus being amazed by them. They had rightly rejected any human source for his abilities. They knew whatever he had going for him, he didn't get it from there. But they just couldn't attribute what he did have to a divine source. And they stumbled at the thought that Jesus could have come from God like he claimed. Now, God could be at the temple in their thinking, but there's no way he could be down there at the carpenter shop in Nazareth. Could he? Nah. They could only accept the things that came through the prescribed and approved channels, their orthodoxy, their way of doing things. That's what we call a sectarian spirit. I've watched that among us in the church over the years. Introduce a new thought. Oh no, you can't say that. That's not true. Boy, I can give you a list that's that long and probably longer of some of those ideas. One of the ones was mentioned the other day, and I forgot who it was that did communion. I think it was Robert. And he said, you didn't like that phrase, the broken body of Jesus. We've taught that traditionally for decades. His body wasn't broken. The Psalms say specifically in prophecy, not a bone of his body will be broken. Why do we say that? Well, we're trying to say something, well, anyway, I don't want to get into all that. But there are a lot of those things that go on, And I've watched people, if you don't come from a certain school, and you haven't been at the feet of some of our trusted guys and the things that they preach, the things that we've heard all of our lives, we're not going to listen to it. No matter how much he's got to say and how good it might be. Aren't you glad that Spirit's not around with us anymore today? I remember years ago I was supported by a church in Texas. I won't tell you who that was. And one of the members asked me one time, he said, did you go to ACU? And I said, no. He said, well, did you go to at least Texas A&M? And I said, no. And Jimmy said, oh, so you're not that good then. You went to another school. That was kind of the implication. I didn't lose any sleep over that. I still haven't. But that's kind of what they're doing with Jesus. We recall all the facts that we know about him, but we can't accept what he's implying based upon what we know. Because if we acknowledge the evidence of what you're presenting to us, that means we're going to have to change our whole view, and we're going to have to worship him. And we're not ready to do that yet. This little boy just grew up here. We're not ready to do that. We still have that going on today, and it's sad. There are religious groups who won't accept the deity of Jesus based upon what their theology teaches, what they have been taught for decades, maybe even a couple hundred years. And changing beliefs is difficult. It's just not done. It's just, next to impossible. I heard a fellow one time say, how many members of the church does it take to change a light bulb? And he said, change? We don't change. Maybe it's telling us something about ourselves. Look at the result in verse 5 and 6. The result's very interesting in all of that. He was not able to do a miracle there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he was amazed. In Matthew's version of this story, Matthew says he did not do any miracles there because of their unbelief. The idea is not that he really couldn't as far as inability. He would not. He would not. Apparently there were so few people there who could be humbled by their pain and suffering that they would come to him for help. And it's incredible that Jesus is so amazed that there are sick people, there are hurting people, suffering people, and they're so full of pride they won't come to Jesus, acknowledge who he is, and be healed, like Jairus did. And like another fellow we're going to talk about here in a little bit. The Bible says he was amazed by it, and the word means he was stunned. He was stunned by that. And here's what I think is going on. Jesus consistently chose not to exercise his incredible power when there was a climate of unbelief. They couldn't see the forest for the trees, as the saying goes. And he consistently would not go along with unbelief and say, well, I'll just go ahead and do some things for you anyway. He wouldn't do that. Somebody said miracles are a funny thing. Doing miracles around people who have decided not to believe does not convince them to believe. Doing miracles in the presence of people who have decided to reject the person doing those miracles hardens them in their unwillingness to believe. What does that mean? Well, think about Pharaoh. Look at all the miracles Pharaoh saw work, one after another, and his heart just got harder. Go read Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11, and especially when you get into chapter 9 there. And God is saying through Paul that he will let your heart become harder when you deliberately choose to reject his works. He did that with Pharaoh. He did that with the nation of Israel, Paul's saying. And in Jesus' day, he's doing that with those people in Nazareth. If you've got that heart of a heart, he's not going to waste his time on you. You remember later on, Jesus would tell his disciples, you kick the dust off your sandals and walk away. Don't waste your time with it. There are some people you don't waste your time with. The unbelief, this is a really important statement. The unbelief of finite humans shackled the omnipotence of an omnipotent God. Let me say that one again. This is a good one to write down and think about. The unbelief of finite humans shackled the omnipotence, the all power of an omnipotent God. Their unbelief kept an all-powerful God from being able to do anything among them. And that amazes me. And the fact that Jesus was amazed by it just blows my mind. Here's a man who could drive out demons, raise the dead, and he can't even work in his own hometown to do good for them. There's a sense in which Jesus is already dying on the cross of rejection. One fellow put it in his commentary, he said, the shadow of the cross is already falling across Jesus because of their unbelief. Here's one little side thought, and I won't charge you for this, and this is free. Somebody suggested, as an interesting thought, that Jesus didn't anticipate them doing this. That's why he's amazed. Usually you stop and think, well, John says that Jesus knew their hearts when he went to the wedding in Cana, John 2. He knew what was in the hearts of people. But here, he didn't anticipate it. But again, I think it's telling us something about the humanness of Jesus. If he had expected it, he wouldn't have been amazed. He was shocked that he was going to get treated this way. He was amazed at their lack of faith. And so he went on to other villages. Now, the second thing I want you to notice is an amazing story of belief. Look over in Luke chapter 7. This is the only other time that Jesus is said in the Bible to be amazed by something. Luke chapter 7, and said verses 1 through 10. That's what we're going to look at. Read along with me. When he had concluded saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. A centurion's servant, who was highly valued by him, was sick and about to die. By the way, every time a centurion is mentioned in the New Testament, it's always in a good light. It's mentioned 4 or 5 times, something like that. Centurion's servant, who was highly valued, was sick and about to die. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, requesting him to come and save the life of his servant. When they reached Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this, because he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue." Well, there you go. Jesus went with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion friends, he said, wait, I got a study note that I missed. The centurion sent friends to tell him. Luke 7, verse 6. He said, "Lord, don't trouble yourself. I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. That is why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it." Jesus heard this and was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found so great a faith even in Israel." When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant in good health. Kind of interesting to contrast, with the people of Nazareth, with what takes place in Luke 7. This man didn't even have an audience with Jesus. He didn't personally get to talk to him like those folks in Nazareth did. He didn't have any of the visible evidence. No miracles were worked for him like there were in Nazareth or other places around. He didn't have any real knowledge of Jesus' background, although he probably heard about him. He didn't have any knowledge of the Jewish scriptures. He had the one thing going for him that the people of Nazareth were needing the most: an amazing faith. Now the question is, where did he get his faith from? What was the source of that faith? Verse 3 says, when you look at that, there were some reports apparently of some incredible witnesses. They knew something about Jesus. They had read and heard, and maybe he looked at the same reports there, and maybe then he wanted to go see him. When you look down at verse 8, you get the idea that his understanding of the nature of authority contributed to his faith. He said he was a centurion. He gave orders. He told people to come, to go, to do this, to do that. You don't get authority unless you're under authority. And what he recognized about Jesus, he knew he got his authority from the Roman army. So he knew with Jesus, you got your authority from somewhere else. He knows this man is powerful because he has authority. I think he reasoned that the authority of Jesus came from God. And that leads to his humility. He doesn't deserve to have Jesus meet with him. Matthew 28:18, Jesus said, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth." Jesus did what he did because he's under the authority of his Father. And even the Jews didn't have that kind of believing. Just look back at Jairus that we looked at. You know, he wanted Jesus to come to his house. The centurion says, you know, just speak. Your word's good enough for me. There's power in that. And the Bible says Jesus was amazed at the man's faith. He hadn't even seen that kind of sincere, honest, obedient, humble faith in Israel. Couldn't find it in his hometown, couldn't find it in the whole country of Israel, but he found it in a Roman soldier. That's interesting. Thirdly, that leads to an amazing story of reactions. One of the things I've concluded looking at this is the reaction of people to Christ is a source of constant amazement for me. Not only what I read about the Bible, but what I've watched in person over the years. The different reactions of people to Jesus Christ are still amazing. They're more amazing in some ways as the unbelief of the world grows, and boy, it's growing by leaps and bounds. So is the biblical ignorance and the error about the Bible. And people get more amazing. You know, I think even with people who are listening to this, as well as the people who are here, there are amazing stories among people if you stop and look. Some from a positive side, some from a negative side, like I said a while ago. You know, there have been people who have come to Christ that, if you thought about it, you know, a few years earlier, you'd have said, man, no way. There is no way that person will ever become a Christian. And the way they've conducted themselves. And there are people who know the truth, they know there's a God, they believe in judgment, the second coming, call themselves Christians, and they worship everything but the Lord. They're so caught up in their materialism, it's not funny. I'm amazed at how many people, and I don't want to impugn anybody's heart, but the suggestion, the implications there, with this pandemic, with people who stay at home, I understand the people who have legitimate fears and concerns, but there are some people who stay home just because it's comfortable and easy thing to do. I can sit around in my pajamas and worship God with the rest of the brethren. It's amazing how you can do that. I don't understand how people can want to be that way. I've known amazing stories of people over the years that I've come in contact with. I heard a story about one fellow in Texas, and he had been a criminal, had a drug history, he'd been shot and knifed and almost died from a gunshot only once, and he became a Christian. And he devoted the rest of his life to traveling around the country, witnessing for Jesus Christ and trying to help young people with their drug problems. The consequences of his previous drug habit eventually caught up with him, and he died probably much too early in some ways. But the point was, when he converted, he did it completely. Amazing. Only God does that with people when they let him. There are other people who want to use Jesus for their own personal benefit, and they amaze me. You know, a lot of these television evangelists and what they have to offer. They amaze me at their gumption to just want to use the Lord. You try to deal with them with truth, they reject that and they refuse. They only want God on their own terms, especially if it helps them be more comfortable with the way they have their Christianity. There have always been people like that from the first century all the way up into today. Remember in Acts chapter 8, Simon the sorcerer? Ooh, he was so impressed, he was amazed at what he saw those disciples doing, working those miracles. And he went ahead and he believed the gospel, he was baptized, but he wanted power. That's all he wanted. One of the things I've learned over the years, and you probably already know this, Raymond, is that ministry is a lot of things, it's never dull. There's always something new that's going on in that. You can never predict how people are going to react to the gospel. Some of the ones you think, well, they're definitely going to obey, won't. And it's also impossible to be amazed or to keep from being amazed at the choices people make. You know, every one of us is making a choice. Every one of us is an amazing story in our own way, one way or another. Some of the stories will have happy endings, and some of them will have sad endings. 49 years ago, I had to travel halfway around the world from my hometown to hear the gospel so that I could come to Jesus. That always amazed me. None of the brethren ever came around to me. I don't know why. But that's okay. You know, it was an incredible journey then, and it's still going on. It's still incredible and amazing. It's a fabulous thing. If you were to write your story right now, just like they wrote the centurions or the people of Nazareth, what do you think the ending might be like for you? That's a serious thing to consider. Let me give you 3 principles so that you can have an amazing story of faith. Remember, you can know all about Jesus and still not really know him. That's the first implication in Mark chapter 6. They thought they knew a lot about Jesus. And a lot of people think they know a lot about Jesus today because they go to church, you know, they've been to Bible class, and they know some Christians, you know, some of the members of Jesus' family, or, you know, whatever reason. But recalling facts, knowing people, is not the issue. The real issue is dealing with what those facts imply and why those people live the way they live. Is that for you? You know, it doesn't matter if you know what sin is or how many people were involved here in this town, and when he went and fed the thousands of people, how many people were involved in all that. What matters is the next day when he said, I am the bread of life. What are you going to do with that? Or with the disciples, you know, they're doing grain between their hands there so that they can eat the grain and throw the chaff away, and doing that on the Sabbath, and knowing all the things about the Sabbath and the theology there. What matters is the next day when he said, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. What are you going to do with that? Is he the Lord of your Sabbath, of your life, if you will? You have to deal with the facts that the claims imply. And you got to let them drive you humbly to your knees like the centurion did. And until that happens, I don't think you really know him. There's more to Jesus than just recalling facts. And secondly, a lack of obedience, not lack of evidence, is the real human problem with God. Make sure there's not a lack of obedience in your life. You know, you can just expect that there are people who are very close to you who are going to reject Jesus Christ. Make sure you don't do that. It's not that people can't believe, it's that they won't believe. I think it was Jim McGuigan who used to say, you know, you can tell me you won't, tell me you don't want to, but don't tell me you can't. Don't tell. My mother used to say, you know, can't means you don't want to and you're too lazy to try. I like that. Not at the time. I would add to it, though, that too selfish to try. That's why you won't do it. I heard a story about Lynn Anderson I had never heard before, and I thought it was a pretty good one. He was asked one time to go speak. He used to tell this story, I guess, several times, so maybe you've heard it before. He was asked to go speak at the JC's in Abilene. And he was asked to come down there and to talk about, you know, setting goals, that kind of thing. And when he was finished, he said, All of this is good, but I'd be the biggest hypocrite in Abilene if I told you the way to get your life together is just by setting goals. He said, if you don't know Jesus Christ, none of this other stuff is really going to ever matter. And there was a man who stood up and he said, hey, don't go bring God into the JCs. And Anderson said, I didn't. God is in your creed. You brought him into the JCs. So, you got to live with that. Well, Anderson left. He was walking out to the parking lot, and he heard this man come running up behind him. He turned around, and it was that fellow. And he came up and he grabbed him by his coat. And he said, you got to help me. Anderson was thinking as the man's running up, I think he's going to get me. But he grabbed him and said, you got to help me. I have to talk to somebody. He said, I make more money in one hand than I can spend with both, but I'm miserable. He said, in the last few weeks, I've slept with every woman in town that I could. My life is falling apart, but I don't want any of this God talk. Anderson said they went to a restaurant and had a cup of coffee, and he listened to the man talk for about 3 hours. And finally, after he'd heard about all he could and mustered up the courage, and he said to him, let me tell you something. He said, the problem is not that you can't believe. The problem is that you won't believe. The problem is not that you're too smart. The problem is you're too wicked. That took courage. He said, you have this nice little playhouse here on the side. You don't want anybody, especially God, messing with it. And the man thought a minute and he said to Anderson, you know, you're right. Because if I accept God, I have to give all that stuff up. And what happens if I give all that stuff up, put it on God, and then I find out he's not there? I won't have anything. And Lynn Anderson said to him, that's the decision we've all got to make. And the man left, and I have no idea whatever happened to the man. And neither did Lynn Anderson. We all have to make that decision. People need to learn how to give up their selfishness. That's the biggest thing holding them back from God. When you make the decision that Jesus is who he claimed to be, when you decide to give up the playhouses, you cannot be the same anymore. And if you're the same, a little bit like you were, you really haven't believed the way you need to yet. And the third principle is this. Jesus will keep his movement alive, even if the ones who should move don't. I think it's interesting. The way he handled Nazareth was, fine, if folks don't want to believe, I'll go elsewhere. There are other people who do. And later his disciples, as I said before, they would do the same thing. His gospel and him are not going to be silenced by paralyzing cynicism. The reaction of people today, you included, may still stun him, but it will not stop him or his message. Isaiah 55 said, his word will not come back to him void. Even if a church becomes faithless, he'll just raise up another church. You know, if you don't believe that, read Revelation 2 and 3. I think there are some churches, their lamps have been put out, and they don't have sense enough to know it yet. Jesus said the gates of hell would not stop him from building his church. And if you think the story has been amazing up till now, just wait until you get to see how it all turns out. That's really going to be the amazing part. Each one of us, as I wind this down, each one of us represent one story after another about Jesus in the eyes of God. Some fill him with gladness, some fill him with sadness. My goal is to fill him with gladness in my life, and from my life. To convict hearts to want to do the same with their lives. To cause a few folks to wake up, to see how incredibly shocking it is at some of the choices they've made and are making in light of Jesus of Nazareth. Oh, how marvelous, oh, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus. May we always stand amazed in his presence. Every one of us is writing a story. It's going to be written in heaven. And we're the only ones who decide what the ending's going to be. And you can just rest assured, one way or another, it's going to be an amazing story. Either for happy or for sad. And that's all I've got for tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to have a blood drive here Tuesday from 10 a.m. till 3. It'll be in the fellowship hall. For those of you at home watching, if you'd like to give blood, then that would be great. We don't really need volunteers to set up or do anything like that. But if anybody wants to come and give and is able to, or if you just want to share the information with your neighbors, please do. You'll see it posted to our Facebook, the blood drive company. Italian, is that what it is? Well, they'll actually post it to their social media, and then it's at the Christian bookstore and various places. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's something that we're going to do here on Tuesday. Men, our breakfast is Saturday at 9 o'clock, and so we hope that you come. You'll be here, right, Jim?
I'll be here.
Excellent.
Ray Herrera is excited about being here. He's really looking
I
forward to it.
talked to him.
Last night.
That must have been when I was talked to him last night. And so, if guys, we can show up for that. And Jerry Owen has a new address. So I will put that in the bulletin. I will get it out in email. And so she's got a new permanent address, which isn't too far from Fairwinds, but it is a new permanent address. And the guys and I, when we get together Saturday, are going to talk about a schedule of just going to see her. Because this, she's going to be there for a while. I want to make sure that we can do that. Oh, I turned it off when I got here. I'm sorry. I need to let you do your job. I'll leave it alone next time. Yeah. So just be praying for our folks in the prayer list. Jennifer is doing okay. So I talked to her today. She still hurts, but the family's taking care of her. She's thankful for all the meals, and so it's been really good. And with that, does anybody have a prayer request? The meal train for Jennifer, it's going to extend on into next week, and so I'm looking at everybody here. I think everybody here is volunteered. So you folks at home, volunteer. And they may not, we'll see if they need it next week or not, we'll find out. But definitely we need to fill in next week. And just keep everybody in your prayers. I think that's it. Jim, would you close us out in prayer, please?
Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you for the lessons you know. Thank you for the knowledge that you have to share with us. Thank you for this congregation. You are our elders, and we want to be our soul. Be with us